including myself, didn't know that the ISS was a available facility, which, empowered me in a way to get involved by, kind of ticking me off. Like, why don't more people know? Why isn't there more resources? Why is the funding only going certain ways? Who has access? How do you get there? There are so many barriers to entry. So I, you know, decided to find out what is the process, and that was about 2014, 2015. So now here we are. We're one of the 13 or 16, I think now, commercial services provider to the ISS. And it did take some time, some learning, but it's been very rewarding. And I just also want to mention here in Puerto Rico, the Science Trust, Andreika is here, Maldonado. She's aggressively and has been really leading the way to fund Puerto Rican science going into the ISS. So we are involved in Puerto Rico. We are established here. We are not going anywhere. We're just getting started.
Thanks, Libby. Justin.
Howdy, my name is Justin Kugler. I'm Director of Business Development for a company called Intuitive Machines. We did the first successful commercial lunar landing in February. We're one of the NASA commercial lunar payload services providers, so that means it's not one and done. We're actually doing this again in the fall, going back to the moon, this time to an area called the Shackleton Connecting Ridge. That's important because that's the region where NASA is going to start, sending human missions to the moon in the not too distant future. And so we're part of the vanguard that's going out there to scout out those locations, deliver science instruments, and make the moon more accessible. And then that'll be followed up with our third mission to the moon late next year. That one's going to be really interesting because we're actually not going to the South Pole like our first two missions. We're going to a interesting gravitational anomaly called Reiner Gamma. And this is truly about, going into the discovery of the unknown. We know that there's a gravitational anomaly in that part of the moon. We have absolutely no idea why. Are there interesting minerals there? Did some weird fluke of geology happen during the moon's molten phase? Nobody really knows. And so we are going to be deploying instruments for NASA to help investigate why that region is the way it is, and if that has implications for surface resource utilization on the moon. And I mentioned that because that really ties in, why I got involved in the space industry. I've always loved space, literally as long as I can remember. When I was about 3, I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. When I was 7, I learned that there was this thing called an aerospace engineer, the people that design and build and operate spacecraft. And everything from that point on was to put me on that track to becoming an aerospace engineer. But I did end up spending some time outside of the space industry working in national security in Washington, D.C. And that experience helped me realize that truly the things that we do in space have to have impact for people's lives here on Earth. It can't just be flags and footprints. That's why Apollo ended the way it did and when it did. Once it satisfied its political mission, there was no support to continue the funding. And so when I came back to the space industry after grad school, it was with that focus of doing really meaningful and impactful things in space to help make people's lives better. So I was part of the team at Johnson Space Center in Houston that got the ISS National Laboratory Office started. I helped companies like NanoRacks and others fly their first commercial payloads to the space station. And then I was part of the original team at CASIS, the organization that manages the ISS National Laboratory. We got companies like Goodyear and Dow Chemical to start doing science experiments on board the space station. And that was when I realized that I could do even more if I jumped into entrepreneurship myself. And so I was recruited to a small company called Made in Space. I was the 22nd hire and their first full-time BD person. We put the first 3D printers on board the International Space Station, and by the time we were acquired by Redwire in 2020, we had done a whole series of in-space manufacturing experiments across a wide variety of materials. And then after the acquisition, it was time for me to, find my next leap. And so I joined the IM team about a year and a half ago. And it's really exciting to me, seeing what we can do on the moon, because we're taking the things that we learned developing the commercial markets in LEO and feeding that forward already so that it's baked in from the beginning. So on every single one of our missions that we're flying to the moon, we're not just flying payloads for government customers. We have excess capacity built into our landers so that we can fly commercial customers as well. We flew an art installation for artist Jeff Koons on our first mission. On our next mission, we have other non-NASA payloads going, and so I think it's a really exciting time because entrepreneurship in space is real, and entrepreneurship on the moon is real.
Olga, please.
Hey, can you hear me? Yes. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here after lunch. I know it's going to be very difficult to pay attention to us, right? So, as I mentioned, my name is Olga Figueroa. Right now, I'm the Associate Director for Business and Education Development for the Florida Space Institute at Space U, that's University of Central Florida. Before that, I was appointed the Arecibo Observatory Director, the first and only female after Francisco departing as our lead. And how I got into space, thanks to Francisco. Back in 2019. So really thankful to him. Thanks for being here today as well. He's been my mentor on this endeavor. And right now I'm working on developing new projects and for Space U and Florida and Puerto Rico as well. And Justin mentioned something really important. We have to do this with a purpose for humans. Not just because we want to go to the moon or just to explore space, because we even have enough problems here on Earth, right? But we have to do something because we have to do it with a purpose and find that purpose. And it has to be for the community and for the humankind, for us, for our health, for our security, food security, sustainability, extreme weather conditions, right? We just have to secure ourselves and the future generations to come. That's why we are here today.
Great words, great words. And so, as I promised, we were going to involve the audience. And to prove that I am a man of my word, someone from the audience needs to come up and give a short presentation, short welcome. Captain Stefan Recchi is the head of GenSpace, the GenSpace division from Gen Global. And he has a little bit of words that I hope will inspire the panel further than what I have been able to do. And he has a couple points that he wants to make about GenSpace and about the opportunities that space has for everybody here. So, Captain Stefan Recchi.
Sure. I don't want to be standing above you.
You're welcome to.
I can stand behind you.
I will allow it to this one time.
Okay.
It's on camera.
It's on camera.
That's good.
All right. Thank you all for the opportunity. Thanks, Keith.
Yes, sir.
So my name's Stefan Recchi, the Executive Director of GenSpace. Just wanted to remind everyone, Gen does not have verticals. We're looking at space as a location, and that's the really cool part about it. We could talk about overview effect, where space has no borders. From space, you don't see the borders, and that's what we're trying to really focus on at GenSpace is entrepreneurship without borders, collaboration, and the really important thing is doing things impactfully. Olga said it. So when you do want to think about creating a business in space, make sure that it's impactful. It's going to help us in some way. So the beauty of GenSpace, and as you know, Gen has over 200 countries in a footprint. We are tying in everyone, and we're also trying not to compete with anyone. So there's a lot of stakeholders, accelerators, incubators, academic, public-private organizations. So we're really, really excited that we have this opportunity, and we have an amazing board. We have an amazing advisory team. The advisory team covers all continents. So we welcome each and every one of you to come up to us, ask us about it, think about a business idea you want to create, and we can help you, point you in the right direction in your location, or we can help you mostly get funding or figure out how to work, if you came to the government session today, how to work with your local government, maybe create a space agency, space program, that kind of thing. So thanks, Heath. How did I do? Was that okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate
Was that
it.
inspirational?
I'm inspired.
Okay, good.
Thank you. So be careful. You may be next asked to come up on stage, so be careful. But so for the rest of the time that we have, what I want to do is focus on 4 main areas. What is the space market? Now, non-traditional, maybe something new, maybe it is something that you're already involved in, but what is that market? What are the barriers to get into and to work within the commercial space area, with it, in it, beside it, whatever, but be associated with space? What are those barriers to entry? Then how do you grow that market, that sector, your area within the overall space environment? How do you grow? And then looking down the road, where are we going? We've heard the word impactful. You actually have to do something. What are you seeing as that downfield projection? 5 years out, where are we headed? So with those 4 big topics, that's what I want y'all to now start talking about. So first off, first question would be, what is the space market? What are the areas that can be involved in space? Not necessarily have been, not necessarily are the forefront markets. Obviously, we know SpaceX, we know Blue Origin, we know big rockets, we know that side. But what are the other areas? Now remember, we are focused here with Latin America and the Caribbean nations. So add that to your answers, if you may, and talk a little bit about what is the space market? Big question. I won't make you do it in the haiku form yet, but that comes later.
Well,
Who wants to talk? Start?
no, go ahead.
Well, okay, Heath.
You have 38 seconds.
Yeah, the space market. My perspective is going to be from the bioscience. That's our lane. We're very, very good at it. There are a lot of sectors that the space industry touches and should touch and will touch eventually. But for bioscience and pharmaceutical drug discovery, this is kind of where I'm going to approach it from. So there are things, some basic why space 101 for the bioscience market. A lot of you in here may or may not know, but biology changes, humans change, products change, consumption changes when in space. And for me, that sets the question of fundamental biology, that every product ever created, everything, every person ever gone, every biology organism in space will be different than it is here on Earth. It kind of sounds like as it is here on Earth. But why that's a compelling is because what we're finding in space from some of our results already with a lot of our collaborations in the space environment, we're finding that people who are in stem cells, a lot of people say, that's not for me, I do stem cells. Well, in space, stem cells proliferate and differentiate faster. What does that mean for the regenerative medicine market? That means that if you can send your cells to space, they produce more efficiently, they're more concentrated. You now have an increased production line because of the utilization of space than you would down on Earth. So 6 days in space equals 6 months in Earth. It's a novel acceleration timeline for the regenerative medicine industry. Again, I use it, in terms of thinking medical. 6 days in space equals 6 months in Earth, and that's not exact, but that is what we're seeing. Maladies, human maladies, onset diseases, osteoporosis is onset in space. Macular degeneration is onset in space. A lot of maladies and human aging topics, you see them in healthy, very, very healthy folks that go to the space station right now. When they come back to Earth, they revert and they get those maladies in space, they come back to Earth, and they go back to their original form. Well, what does that mean to a scientist? That means that somewhere there is a trigger that onset disease, but when they came back, reversed the disease. So if we can start thinking about how to utilize a space environment to trigger the genes that cause Alzheimer's, and when they come back, where is that switch in the genome? Because space stressed it out, whether it's the microgravity environment or the low-dose radiation environment. That, to me, is what my colleagues, my scientists, they're looking for that switch. And now we have capabilities to do genome editing, to look at whole species and do comparisons, space versus Earth, and we can start pinpointing and finding where those on-off triggers for these diseases start and how to start reversing it for the good here on Earth. Thinking of Latin America, we have a bioprospecting program at Rhodium Scientific, and what that is, it's a bioprospecting program that feeds into the drug discovery pipeline. A novel product, what is like 80% of all pharmaceuticals are basically discovered from a natural compound. That's a compound that's here on Earth. It's already made by nature. They found a synthetic way to recreate it, hence now drug molecules and commercialization. When we take organisms and things to space, they react differently than what they do here on Earth. For example, Staph aureus on Earth is a skin infection. It's gold when you plate it on a petri dish. In space, Staph aureus is no longer pathogenic. It no longer causes the skin disease. And the gold color turns to white. It loses its gold carotenoid, basically. And so what is that? It's a secondary metabolic shunt that shuts off some of that pathway. But that's the things we can start finding out in space to reverse common diseases here on Earth. Same with salmonella. Salmonella in space is more pathogenic. It's more deadly. It has more capacity to cause higher infection rates than in space than it does on Earth. It became, more pathogenic. So what are those switches that turn on and off organisms that we can use as a countermeasure or start looking at, in terms of, combating that? So those are a lot of fields that, in Latin America with a lot of the novel compounds, access to mining the environment to utilize things in space for potential novel compound discovery. That's where I think my interest lies. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So right there, if somebody asks, what did you learn today? Learn that now you can say that the pharmaceutical industry, drug discovery, drug development, regenerative medicine industry should be going into space and should benefit from the space environment. That will get investors talking, that will get policymakers talking, that will get new sectors talking. So there's one. Just over.
For me, the key elements in Latin America, it's our location, right? Our location because of the cost, right, of our landmark we can use for space tourism. Like space tourism is not new. This started 20 years ago. But nowadays we talk about it. It wasn't talked about it before. But people are going to space 20 years ago. Soon we will have options, like when you take a cruise, right? And we just have to focus like how we can develop space tourism in Latin America. What offerings we can offer to tourists, right? Humans look for an experience. That's it. We want to use our senses, right? We look for experiences. So we have to develop that, and we have key elements in Latin America to be able to do that, as well as food security, agriculture. We can do a lot of models here in Latin America, not only Puerto Rico, but Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Central America, Honduras. I believe those are key because it will impact humans, and also education. We have to educate people, educate the next generation to come. We need to develop the skills needed to accomplish all the things we plan to do in space.
Absolutely. And to add to that, Olga, that not just the location for the tourism side, but also there's a huge launch advantage being closer to the equator. There's resource utilization around the area that can be taken advantage of in space.
And research development as well, as Olivia mentioned.
Absolutely. And the agriculture side is very interesting that you mentioned that. Land use, optimization of land use from looking at satellite data. seeing where different soil locations are, where crops should be planted, resource management in that side, all the way down to water reclamation and making more efficient utilization of soil nutrients, nutrient acquisition, a built environment, which you learn from a spacecraft, can be utilized back in an agricultural setting. With Robert, we were talking about within Ecuador, with banana crops, and there many things that can be done by learning how to farm in space in a resource limited environment can be translated back to Earth.
We have a couple of case studies from Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela. They used that, satellite technology and launching to study crops, to study the Amazonian forest, how, it can be improved. So we can even become a hub.
And I want to touch on the seed. So recent results coming back from space, coriander seeds grown in space compared to their ground-based terrestrial counterpart produced 30% increase in leaf production. Why is that? Looking at it from an industry perspective, I'm like, okay, well, that's a natural fertilizer using Mother Nature. Perhaps it's the low-dose radiation environment, perhaps it's the microgravity environment. We call those combined, the space environment, because it's low-dose radiation and it's lack of gravity. But what is it that's stressing out the germination portion of that seed to increase in yield? If we can find that out without using pesticides, without using fertilizers, it's a natural solution to what we already have here on Earth.
Good words. Mr. Justin.
And I'd like to add, from an entrepreneurship perspective, there are already a lot of resources and attention being given to things like launch vehicles, and as we've seen, that's a very hard market to compete in. There's something like 300 launch companies worldwide that are all trying to compete with SpaceX, and really I think only a handful of those will survive, and so to focus on entrepreneurship that can grow, and I'm biased because one of my mentors once said that there are two constants in this industry: propulsion and payloads. And if you focus on payloads, you'll never run out of something to do. And so I'm a payloads guy. But for Latin American entrepreneurs, I think focusing on what are the things that we do when we get up there, and how can you translate those capabilities to have local impact. That's where I think you'll get the most bang for your buck, and that could take a wide variety of forms. With the CubeSat and SmallSat revolution, it's less expensive than ever to put things like hyperspectral cameras, radio frequency sensors, things like that in space. And with the advent of the ISS National Laboratory and now the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, you can pay commercial rates to fly instruments the size of a shoebox to space, and you can do useful work in something that size. And so I think for entrepreneurs in Latin America, you've got to look at what are the critical problems in your home region that you're trying to solve, whether it's land use, water use. My previous company, we did a project with Braskem in Brazil, actually looking at how you could take advantage of the work that we were doing on the space station to miniaturize plastic recycling technology and actually reduce waste streams going into the Amazon by enabling recycling at the point of use. Looking at those creative applications to solving local problems using space technology, rather than trying to go head to head with the people that have billions of dollars of capital and investment. I think that's the way to go.
And Justin, that provides a really nice link to the next section, because the next section I want to talk about is the barriers to entry. And sometimes, and if you're a startup, if you're an entrepreneur, one thing that you really want to focus on is, do I want to go in and set up something completely new in the area? Or do I want to solve a problem that's critical to that area? Do I want to enhance an industry that is there by making a new, better mousetrap? rather than coming in and saying, I want to bring the space industry into my local area, how do you, as what Justin just said, how do you use the problems of and solve the problems of that local area by incorporating space into that cycle? And so I think that that can lead to that lowering of barriers of entry. But I'd like to know what your thoughts are, because each of you have now been in the space industry and gotten into the space industry and talked to and helped other groups get into the space industry. But what do you see as some of the high level, the first level, orders of magnitude, small areas of barriers of entry that can be addressed? Obviously, I'm taking money off the table. Because obviously, more money, you get to do everything. That's the easy answer. What are some of the other barriers that can be knocked down that can help broaden the space market?
Rules and regulations, policy.
Okay.
So depends on your country, right? You have to verify the rules and regulations of that landmark before initiating any type of activity, such as space-related industry. Education, because you need to develop the people who's going to be supporting your company. So you need to be very focused on the skills needed, like the skill set of the people you are going to be hiring or proposing to be hiring. Because also, if you are going to that country, for example, not Puerto Rico, let's use Brazil. If you want to go to Brazil, you should use and hire the locals, but you have to be careful to see if they have the skills needed to support your new venture, things like that. So also, if that's a problem, you can start with an educational program, right? And then you can teach them, you can develop your workforce. It's going to be a community engagement project. It will be an asset to your company.
And I think the workforce development is an excellent one. And I think that too much within the space industry, everybody in the space industry goes to the same space industry conferences. You go to the same meetings. You high five each other and say, hey, we're doing well. But you're not expanding that industry. And so going out to other conferences, other workshops, other universities to be able to say, hey, you should be in the space industry. You could be in the space industry. Now you're expanding the workforce by getting them to understand that their industry also applies to space. So that workforce development one is critical.
It is.
What do y'all think? What's other barriers? Expand on that.
A very particular barrier when trying to get agreements with NASA to do business in space. It was very nebulous and convoluted and confusing. There was no direct path. It was, here, hand us your thing, and then we'll take it from here. I'm like, well, my thing is an FDA-approved thing, so there's no way I'm handing you my stuff, and neither are any of my clients or collaborators. There's a certain chain of custody that has to be followed. And just, well, what you don't trust the astronauts, well, it's not about trusting anybody. It's about regulatory standards and the lack thereof in the space industry. So I did see that there was a gap to start incorporating those standards and the processes and procedures that industry follows, and to apply that to the space environment. Right now we call that the quality industry compatible space process, and that allows for a regulated industry to come and utilize the space station where before it was what we call cowboy chemistry. And that, I'm not meaning that disparaging, but there's no standardization, there was no regulation, there is no quality control, quality assurance, metrics, nothing. So we're just now starting to put and apply those standards to space-based research and biotech.
And I think that point needs to be reiterated with it, because it's really big, and I've heard this through many different talks, is that space industry, NASA in particular, was very walled off from the rest of the world, in that you come in, you do it our way. We don't want to hear your way, you will do it our way. And when you're dealing with a big energy industry, a big pharmaceutical industry, large agricultural industries, they have their own policies already set up. It's been working for the last 100 years. And now NASA wants them to bend to your rules. They have their own problems. And so they don't get into the industry. They don't move in And so, Olivia, what you're saying is that being able to then bring those policies into the space sector opened up that industry to now take advantage of the space environment.
Right, and Rhodium didn't create those policies and standards alone. We did it with the Department of Defense, who vetted 3 prototypes for biomanufacturing processes, microbial growth processes, and regenerative medicine processes in space. So those are 3 prototype processes that the DoD said they're no longer processes, they're a successful prototype, product approved. Even though it's not something you can put your hand on, it's a methodology that now DoD is following for all their science through Rhodium Scientific in space. The other national laboratories on the ground, Los Alamos National Lab, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, are following through Rhodium on the ground. That the trust and that the folks here, their high level of quality assurance here on Puerto Rico, they're following the quality assurance protocols because we want to bring back a product. We don't want to just see what happened. We want to see what happened and then commercialize it, because that's what is the ROI for my company, for our investigators, our collaborators. There has to be more of a reason than just going. And so applying those standards so you can bring back a product, and with no doubt, you know it wasn't user error, you know it wasn't the miscalibration of a balance, you know it wasn't, some mishandling, improper mishandling. It was for sure a result of the microgravity environment.
So then, Justin, I'm going to make you do a little pivot on this, because your company has the distinction of breaking an enormous barrier by being the first commercial company to land a vehicle on the moon. And so you've gone out from, and a lot what we've talked about is with LEO, the low Earth orbit environment, near Earth, orbiting the Earth. You went to the moon. And so there's a whole new set of barriers and whole new set of access. Talk a little bit about that side and how you are breaking barriers to now going further out, and how you're involving other companies, markets, areas to go into that direction.
Right. So I think, for us, the approach that we took was to apply much of the same philosophy to lunar vehicle design as SpaceX did for launch boosters, in that we designed our architecture, and then we started building hardware on the ground and testing it, and we really built our vehicle around our propulsion system, because we recognized that was going to give us a major differentiator as compared to our competition. And so you look at other lunar landing companies, they can take up to months to get to the moon, because they have to do what are called low energy trajectories. Because we use a high impulse liquid oxygen, liquid methane propulsion system, we can get to the moon in 6 days. And that means that we can maximize our time on the surface and maximize our value to our customers. And that reduced time in transit also reduces the risk of an adverse outcome, like a solar radiation event or things like that. And so, because we really built that vehicle literally from the ground up, the only things that we buy are solar panels and radios and flight computers. Everything else we build in-house. And so having that ability to rapidly test, iterate, test again, and update our design, that allowed us to build a system that could take advantage of lower cost, more frequent commercial launch, and feed that philosophy forward to going to the moon. And so we've estimated that even including paying SpaceX for the launch, it still is only a tenth of what it would have cost NASA to do something similar, following their own internal processes. And it really takes that combination of having experienced people that know what works and what doesn't work, with new creative people that don't know what can't be done. And that combination and it's a good kind of tension drives that kind of innovation.
That little energy right then is what has changed. And I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to be able to say back in my day when we started out in the industry, to get to space, it was a 3, 5, 6, 7 year process. And so the academic market was out. If you really wanted to fly something in space and do something with the academic market, faculty were looking at beyond tenure before they would get something to space. Grad students couldn't be involved in it. Now you're looking at Justin talking about they're innovating to get to the moon in 6 days. Olivia mentioned the quick space process where they're getting to space and Francisco was cringed when she said it, getting to space in 4 to 6 months, not 4 to 6 years. And so now that is one of the huge barriers to entry that has been eliminated, because now if you are in the biotech industry and you are looking at vaccine development, you don't want to try and come up with the first COVID vaccine in 2028. We hope we don't need one still by then, but you want to have vaccine development now. You want to help crops now. If you want to talk about policy shifts and a politician has to leave office in 3 or 4 years and setting up a policy for their first mission in 7 years out, you're crazy. It doesn't work. And so one of the biggest barriers to entry for this industry is now the commercial space side. And so if you've had any experience within NASA before, if you've had experience writing proposals with NASA before, erase it. Now you're in a commercial space sector where you can go to space now. Justin mentioned about the CubeSat small sats, cheaper than ever. Launch cost, cheaper than ever. Launch cost getting cheaper by the day. This opens up a bigger market. So then with that, this is where we've come real fast, pun intended, over the last 10 years. The next 2 sections I'm going to combine given the time that we have, in that how do we grow this industry going forward and where are we going to be in 5 years? We've seen that some of these barriers to entry have been limited, have been broken down, but where do we go from here to maintain this rise that we're seeing in involvement, in the number of countries involved, in the number of groups involved, in Stefan Recke leaving the room, in all of these different things? Where do you see the industry going? Yes, please, Gail.
One huge market that you have not touched on is communication. So in your responses, I'd love to
Yes.
understand that, because
Satellite.
that is something that relates to everybody.
Good words. Thank you, Gail.
I also wanted to include the cost of tourism, because before it was millions of dollars to go to space, and nowadays it's just $250, right? So we are improving. Soon it will be $20K. You never know, right? Because of the future and the new technologies. As Justin mentioned, 6 days to go to the moon. So it's very important for us to focus on commerce.
Good words.
I think one challenge when Rhodium Scientific started and said, hey, NASA, how do we start doing this space business? And they said, we have to come to us with your widget. And we're like, well, what's a widget? And they're like, it's a thing you create that only goes in space. And I'm like, well, why is it just one thing that only goes in space? Aren't there widgets on Earth? No, it have to be a space widget. And so, okay, now a biotech company now has to turn engineering, which turns off a lot of new entrants into the market, because the engineering specifically for a space widget was like, no, I'm going to do genetics. I'm not doing engineering of space hardware. This is crazy. And if I wanted to do that, it was too much. So one way Rhodium kind of disrupted and entered the commercial space market was, let's use what we have in the lab. Let's look around here. The humans are very resourceful. They've done a lot. They've built a lot. Why are we re-engineering the same wheel? I'm sure there's a wheel down here we can use, modify it a little bit to make sure it's not going to harm the astronaut or outgas its components, or it doesn't make too much noise, or it doesn't beep too bright. There's a few constraints that you do have to follow to make sure that the vehicle and then the astronauts are safe in orbit. But there's so much already here. I mean, what I like to call it is, the commercial off-the-shelf COTS parts. We have already instruments, analyzers, tools on Earth. we don't have to recreate a wrench just because it's going to be a space wrench. That's crazy. So that's traditionally how it's been and why it's been so expensive, because people were not just reusing what we have here to be in space. So in 5 years, I would like to see, a space station that's outfitted with equipment that we know what it is. We know who built it because they're a global manufacturer of balances or of incubators or of refrigerators. There doesn't need to be one special space refrigerator. But that's right now what the space station looks like. And when it breaks, no one knows how to fix it, just one company, and maybe hopefully that engineer is still there. So it's really kind of, it's very old and antiquated the way things are done, and it's very wasteful. I think in terms of thinking sustainably, we have the tools and resources and the talent here. We have global manufacturers of equipment here. Why are we, creating one-off companies to build a space one thing? And also, in terms of communications, as Gail Nolan mentioned, we have to right now use TDRS system, which is a very old, antiquated system to communicate in space. It is coming down, but there are so many other, why aren't we using a commercial provider? Why does NASA have its one special system that only NASA can use and is very special, and then no one else can use it, and then that's that? It just doesn't make sense. We can't communicate with our hardware, so if we want to talk and work with our equipment in space, we have to now learn a new communication pathway instead of just using the existing infrastructure that could also do it. So that's what I would like to see, is more sustainability, more things that are familiar, things that regular people know what they are and can fix, and therefore involve, more of the economy.
Steve.
If you don't mind, a follow-up question on that.
Please.
You're so right, Olivia. And it does make me think about, I don't know if folks know that the International Space Station is going to retire by the end of the decade, maybe a little after. And then we're going to have a new fleet of commercial space stations that are going to be in space. In that context, are you hopeful that a pure commercial space station might be more in line with the kind of thinking that you just articulated?
Yep. I love this question, because if they're not in line, they're not getting the industry business.
Well, because NASA is government. That's why it's key and critical. If you're going to start your new project in, for example, Argentina, go to the government first.
I have a trivia question. What Windows version of the ISS runs on?
Linux.
No. Windows 10. Yeah.
But imagine all the hardware that was already up there running on Linux or operating 07, and the software upgrades. Why?
Justin, I know you're.
Yeah. Well, and to Olivia's point,
The company that made the wrench in space. But go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we did. Yeah, we 3D printed the first wrench in space.
Yeah.
It was a wrench.
It was a wrench. Yes.
Called out the wrench. Nice.
Yeah. So, as we were building up, for our first lunar mission here at IM, we realized that, the NASA Deep Space System was oversubscribed.
Yeah.
And for us to have, full control of our vehicle throughout the whole mission, that, we were going to have to come up with our own solution. And so what we've done is we've built half racks, and we've partnered with radio astronomy telescopes all over the world so that we could build our own commercial lunar data network. And we were able to actually use that system to, communicate with our vehicle, bring data back, bring it to its landing, and then collect data from our lander direct from the moon to those antennas. And then we have a cloud-based system through which we can, securely and in an encrypted fashion distribute data to our customers without crossing the streams and without, somebody, seeing somebody else's data package, using industry standard, terrestrial industry standard processes to do that. And so looking ahead, we see a lot of opportunity to build that up because as the Artemis program proceeds, as commercial companies like Interloon want to do helium-3 mining on the moon, they need to have comms, data, position navigation and timing, all of those things that we take for granted in terms of communication and navigation, with all the, capability that's packed into this, they're going to expect something similar to develop their businesses on the moon. And so we've actually invested some of our own money in building up those capabilities. We have a bid out to NASA to provide data and navigation services through commercial lunar satellites around the moon. And having that kind of infrastructure, creating the platforms that allow other people to do business on the moon and in space, that's where I think we'll get that flywheel going.
And to add to that, Justin, and Steve, what you asked about, what about the commercial space stations coming online? It's not just what's in space, it's also what's on the ground supporting that business network. So the communication infrastructure needs to be there. And because of IP, because of ITAR, because of other infringing territories, we need to make sure that it's protected and that it's secure and that there's a standard level of, ground-based infrastructure for communications, but also for payload processing facilities. Steve runs and is in charge of the Global Spaceport Alliance, and there's a lot of folks in there building spaceports all over the United States and the world, but to what spec, to what specification, we don't know. I mean, what would be great is if, industry said, well, if you want to bring in pharma, you need this level of laboratory. If you want to do, high school STEM, then you can do this level of laboratory. But, deciding what the ground infrastructure is and what it can support is going to enable the industry that comes to that particular spaceport, to that particular facility, and ultimately to that particular commercial space station. It has to be seamless back and forth. Otherwise, it's just nothing but disconnected dots and people doing different things. And it's right now a little disorganized. But I think, in the next 5 years, this will be more streamlined and more visionary from the ground facilities to the space station facilities.
Totally agree with you. Robert, you had a question or comment.
Yes, a question for each one of the panelists. What current projects or in your pipeline for each one of your organizations do you have where Latin America can get behind or participate? There's something exciting that people can say, okay, we want to be part of that. How do we get involved?
In 60 seconds or less.
I do UCF at the Florida Space Institute. UCF is Space U. We have a Space Edge program that's starting, I believe, August 8th. Is open for applications for new ideas, entrepreneurship. So stay tuned on the website of UCF. We have several labs, microgravity, students can come, internship programs, summer programs. Feel free to reach out.
60 seconds or less. Go ahead.
All right. So Intuitive Machines is one of the 3 companies that was selected by NASA to be a finalist to build what's called the Lunar Terrain Vehicle. It'll be the new dune buggy for the astronauts. But even more than that, it's supposed to be a workhorse. And our system has a modular trailer system attached to it. And much like what we're doing with other transportation services, we will actually own and operate the vehicle. NASA will use it when they are there, and then when the astronauts aren't there, it reverts back to us to be able to do work for other customers. And so Latin American organizations that are interested in doing things like lunar resource prospecting, lunar experiments, lunar technology development, can use RLTV as a platform to do that. And I'm actually leading our commercialization plan and commercial development committee. And so, anybody that's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk to them.
And calling all researchers and technology developers. We are right now facilitating and open to providing rapid access to the space environment. You could be academic researcher, industry researcher, or government researcher. What this means is a lot of folks say, oh, space is not for me, that's for NASA. But if you're doing anything that benefits any food consumption or human health or product development or material science, it applies to you. And the business reasons are compelling. The folks who are not involved in the space research and technology development are behind, because the folks in space are getting a competitive advantage. So Rhodium Scientific is here to facilitate access and to develop these ideas, existing products, not just an idea. We want whatever you're already working on. That's what we're going to call the ground control. So you have the data for the ground control. You just need access to the space environment to have your space-based application.
And Robert, to add to that, since I have the microphone, I'm moderator, I can say what I want. So we also, with Rhodium, we set up a Puerto Rico Space Launch Challenge here in Puerto Rico to facilitate and catalyze the biotech industry to understand that they can be and should be involved in space. It was science-based and tech development-based. That program is modular. And so for any country, any region, any university within Latin America and the Caribbean nations that want to take advantage of that program, it's a one-year cycle. It involves getting to space, getting a payload to space, and it can be focused on local challenges, like we said here, whether it's agriculture, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it is mineral right resource, whatever. You get to choose, the stakeholders get to choose what that program is. That's an immediate kickstart into the space, commercial space arena. And it can be done within a one-year cycle. We did it here in Puerto Rico within 1 year. Gladly do it down in Ecuador. Take a pick anywhere else. We can do that. So we are now over time. We started a little late, but in 20 seconds, your final words, inspirational thoughts down the line. Olga, you start.
Advocate for change, support each other, a lot of collaborations, local, community engagement, and international collaborations. That's key for success.
Good words. Justin.
It's never been a better time to do business in space. It's out there waiting for us. All we have to do is go get it.
Our new T-shirt design. Thank you. Yes, 100%.
As an
Olivia.
entrepreneur, it took me a little bit of time to realize that, yes, there is competition, but there's so much to go around. Right now is the time to collaborate, to get things in space. And then when you're successful, then compete. But don't compete now while you're trying to get off the ground. Collaborate and go together and then diversify.
Perfect. Words to live by. We'll be here all week. Please stop by and see us, talk to us, Gen Space, look into it. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you, panelists. Well, thank y'all.